Capcom's Resident Evil series has been a champion of the survival horror genre since its inception in 1996. Now the series is fast approaching its 20th anniversary and shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. So in celebration and contemplation of the series, let's take a look back over Resident Evil's history. The first Resident Evil, directed by Capcom's Shinji Mikami, launched on March 22nd, 1996 for Sony's PlayStation and saw players take on the role of a lone character stranded in an ominous mansion surrounded by undead horrors, trying to survive the ordeal and figure out just what the hell was going on. Considering the setting and enemies, this could be where Resident Evil's title came from outside of Japan, where it's known by the infinitely cooler title of Biohazard. But a trademark dispute with an American metal band forced Capcom to change the name outside of its native lands.
Joseph!
The game was constantly threatening, as although zombies were slow, they were tough, and ammunition for your weapons was constantly scarce. But as you got used to the zombies and you'd gathered some more weapons from the game, it introduced frog mutant things and giant spiders that would shit on your survival plans pretty good. The progressive tension that this created became a staple of future installments of the series as well. The game also managed to create a lot of tension by reducing your opportunity to save often. Players had to find and expend single-use ink ribbons in order to save their game, meaning that death had real consequences. Having to load your last save after being killed could undo hours of progress. Resident Evil managed to be a horror game that was terrifying and challenging from start to finish, and it became a huge success for Capcom, resulting in releases on the Sega Saturn and the PC. I first played Resident Evil on the Sega Saturn because I didn't have a PlayStation at the time, and all my friends had been telling me about how good it was. I remember I was terrified as hell of it, but the game was so good that I felt I had to push myself through to the end. Resident Evil also later received a director's cut, a Game Boy Color and DS version, and eventually a remake on Nintendo's GameCube in 2002 that performed amazingly well at retail. Following the success of the original game, Shinji Mikami returned as a producer on Resident Evil 2, released for the PlayStation in 1998, and set on the last place on Earth you'd ever want to live, Raccoon City. Resident Evil 2 followed much of the formula set out by the first game. You played as one of two characters, explored the game's environments, and pieced together the game's plot by briefly encountering survivors and reading diaries. The game also featured an interesting zapping system that encouraged replayability by locking an alternative scenario for the game's other character once you'd finished it with the one of your choice. Resident Evil 2 also featured two standalone minigames, The Fourth Survivor, where you played as Hunk, or Human Unit Never Killed, an Umbrella Corporation soldier with the worst codename ever, and The Tofu Survivor, which let you play as a giant block of friggin' tofu. Resident Evil 2 performed well at retail, becoming the fastest selling video game in North America. It also saw a re-release on Nintendo's N64 console and has remained a fond experience for gamers the world over. Fans of the game have been petitioning for a remake for years, and after a half-decent fan attempt, Capcom have recently officially endorsed a remake of the game for new audiences and old fans to enjoy. Following the success of Resident Evil 2, 1999 saw the release of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, a game set during and after the events of Resident Evil 2, as Jill Valentine, one of the original game's protagonists, escapes Raccoon City's downfall. Resident Evil 3 introduced an almost unkillable enemy called the Nemesis, who spent the entire game hunting down members of. Resident Evil 3 also contained a minigame called The Mercenaries that became available after you finished the main story. It saw players fighting to escape Raccoon City while facing off against various monsters ready to rip your head off and or eat you alive. Resident Evil 3 was a unique take on the established Resident Evil formula, and I enjoyed it immensely. To this day, it remains one of my personal favourite games from the series. On release, Resident Evil 3 was an instant hit with fans and critics, becoming a top-selling game in the US and Europe, and was eventually ported to several other consoles, including the N64, the Dreamcast, the PC, and the GameCube. After Resident Evil 3, Capcom brought us the first series spin-off title, releasing the G-Con light gun-enabled Resident Evil Gun Survivor for the PlayStation, and also Code Veronica, which was originally released for Sega's Dreamcast in 2000. Code Veronica was a decent enough addition to the series, but after its release, Capcom went into full-blown spin-off mode. In 2001 we received Resident Evil Gaiden on the Game Boy Color and a follow-up to Gun Survivor in the form of Gun Survivor 2, Code Veronica. As well as the excellent remake of the original Resident Evil, 2002 also gave us Resident Evil Zero for Nintendo's GameCube. Resident Evil Zero acted as a prequel to the original game, where you played as a member of the STARS Bravo team who got all messed up in the first game, and her tattooed friend who never showed up in any of the games ever again. Resident Evil Zero performed well at retail, but it didn't quite manage to follow the sales that the Resident Evil remake had made before it. The Gun Survivor trilogy was completed in 2003 with the release of Resident Evil Dead Aim, and also saw the release of Resident Evil Outbreak on the PlayStation 2. Now, I loved Outbreak. It was a game set during the events of the Raccoon City incident and saw you taking control of one of 8 everyday civilian stereotypes.
Kiss my ass, bitch!
Outbreak was the first cooperative game in the series and connected players over the internet. It was way ahead of its time in terms of multiplayer, but these features never made it to the Western releases. A year later, in 2004, Outbreak File 2 was released as a standalone expansion to the first title and played very similarly to its predecessor, except this time around the online features actually worked on Western releases. In 2005, Shinji Mikami returned to the series and began working on Resident Evil 3.5 that was designed to be the finale to the Resident Evil universe. During development, fundamental changes were made to the game, and eventually Mikami stepped in wholesale and changed the project to what we now know as Resident Evil 4 after he deemed many of the game's features to be too fantastical. These ideas were later used as the basis for another Capcom game that went on to do quite well for itself. When Resident Evil 4 released, it was a breath of fresh air for the series. The game opted for a third-person, over-the-shoulder camera and used many mechanics familiar to action games at the time. You could also free-aim weapons, which made accuracy a factor, and also allowed players to attack weak points on enemies. Considering the game had gone back to its roots of scarce ammunition, with a focus on resource management, these changes were welcomed. The environments in the game were varied and foreboding, evoking memories of the claustrophobia of the original Resident Evil. Enemies were also unsettling, challenging, and in one particular case, they were bloody unkillable nightmare fuel. Resident Evil 4 is considered a strong entry in the series and sits alongside Resident Evil 2 in the spot for the best game in the series as far as fans are concerned. 2007 saw the Nintendo Wii get a release of Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, a rail shooter set during the events of previous games. It received a sequel, Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles, in 2009. 2009 also gave us Resident Evil 5, a game that kind of feels out of place in the series as it replaces most of the horror elements with action set pieces, blockbuster action game tropes, and enough ammunition that even the survival part of Resident Evil's signature style has gone out the window. The game still sold really well at retail and was a strong commercial move for the series, but many fans were worried that the game marked a new direction for Resident Evil, and we all probably should have listened. 2012 was a mixed year for the series and saw 3 new releases. Resident Evil Revelations, released on Nintendo's 3DS, it placed the player in a campaign that swapped between tight claustrophobic environments for Resident Evil purists and action set-piece levels that were pandered to action game fans. I didn't play Revelations despite owning a 3DS until it was re-released in HD on Xbox Live, and it was actually quite a good game. The next release that year came in the form of Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, developed by Slant 6 Games of SOCOM fame. The game took place during the events of Resident Evil 2 and allowed you to play as a squad of Umbrella soldiers as they attempt to cover up the outbreak. The setup was an excellent idea, and I, along with a bunch of my friends, rushed out to buy the game. Unfortunately, the game was probably the buggiest, messiest, most bland thing I've played in recent memory. It's awful, to be honest, but I still enjoy playing it with friends in multiplayer games. I guess that just goes to show that even crap games can be fun with your mates. In October of the same year, we received the train wreck that was Resident Evil 6. The game took place across 3 campaigns, and it featured uninspired horror design, by-the-numbers shooting, and frustrating as balls quick-time events. I did play through all of the campaigns, but it was a struggle as I wanted to put the game down almost as much as I wanted to play it. Resident Evil felt like it had fully lost its identity and sold out its ideals in order to achieve commercial success. Critics and most fans were split on opinion of the game, with most reviews falling firmly on either side of mediocrity. Some fans loved the game because it was Resident Evil and it was all new and shiny, but you can't help feeling that if it didn't carry that name, then the game would have come off a lot worse, both critically and commercially. With that said, the game was a huge success for Capcom, having sold over 5.9 million units worldwide. Honestly though, I'd rather just move on from this as quickly as possible. After Resident Evil 6, things got relatively quiet for the series. 3 years later, in 2015, the episodic Resident Evil Revelations 2 has been released. Spread across 4 chapters, the game sees Barry Burton and Claire Redfield take on a new breed of undead in a cooperative-focused adventure, with one player acting primarily as support to the other. Recently, at 2015's Tokyo Game Show, Capcom announced Resident Evil Umbrella Corps, a team-based online squad shooter coming to the PS4 and PC. The twist is that, as well as competing against the other team, players will have zombies roaming the map that can either be hazards or used as a tactical asset. Early demos show a game that needs some work, but it shows potential. We'll have to wait until its 2016 release though to find out for ourselves how the game turns out. So there it is, Resident Evil. What are your thoughts on the series? Do you want to see another sequel? Would you like it to go in full reboot mode? Or do you want to just see the series canned completely? Are you looking forward to Umbrella Corps? As usual, you can leave comments below or fire them at me directly on Twitter at Reikimaru. Thanks very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all again very soon.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Joseph!